So next up we have swords, which is another great suit. People usually get kind of scared when swords cards comes out, but I think they're not all so bad. So Ace of Swords is all about so swords typically represent like mental energy, right? So we've had passionate sexual desire energy in the wand cards, so that's like your like drive to do things, right? Then we had emotional energy in the cups with water, and then we're moving on to like mental energy in the swords, which are represented by air, and then we'll get to pentacles, which are more of like the physical world and material kind of representation and related to earth. So Ace of Swords is all about potential and thought, right? And mental thought. So this could be like new challenges and things in the mind and related to like intellect and things. Or it could be like new ways to organize your thoughts. Typically, this is how you approach the world on a mental level, right? How do you perceive things? How do you see things? How do you interpret things? How are things what you think they are and what they aren't? How are you approaching the world on that level? How are you thinking about things? Are you positively thinking about things? Are you negatively thinking about things? How are you interpreting the world around you? So the Two of Swords is typically about a duality or kind of an interruption. Um, so it's like if you look at like the Rider Waite deck, right? It's usually like it's the girl holding two swords and she's blindfolded. She's not necessarily sure of which decision to make, right? She's usually stuck between two choices. Um, in this case, like the guy picked up the potential of the ace, right? And he's like got all this potential for thought, right? But now he's like second guessing himself and stuff. Like he's stuck between two choices. And he probably made up one himself because that always happens. Because there's always like the right answer, and then there's like the answer that these other answers that we make ourselves think are important for some reason or another, even though they don't make sense to be important. The Three of Swords then is usually known as the Heartbreak card. So this card came up because you made the wrong choice. You made that choice that you gave a bunch of value to for some reason in your head and really came out of nowhere. But this is your chance to learn from something, right? Because you are inexperienced still. You're only at the three, right? This is something you created from your own thought, right? Like you created this less than pleasurable situation because of the way you perceived things or the way you thought about things. How do you say your name? Sisonisis? Thank you. It is a really gorgeous deck. How is your day going? This is a gorgeous deck. I'm really happy to show it off. I saved it for tonight because I figured there might be more people around on a Saturday. And it also gives a good. I'm really liking how it lets me talk about the suits more as like a story. Yeah, I really like the swords in this deck too, because they're shown on like this like winter level, right? So then after you've kind of had your like heartbreak moment and the like I goofed, we get to the Four of Swords, and the Four of Swords is typically depicted in deaths or in decks as like it's almost like a knight like laying in a tomb, right? So it's like almost like you've experienced a death, right? Like you've got to accept your failures, right? But you come to a sort of stability from that. Um, you're able to get back to a place again where you're willing to consider things in new ways. But the four also represents a point where you're kind of still stubborn and unwilling to accept that you messed up, right? It's kind of that transition phase, like the period where you're stubborn and you're stubborn and you're stubborn, and then you slowly start to realize what you did wrong. Some people realize it more quickly than others, but I feel like for a lot of people, there's periods of stubbornness. Just call you sis. Okay, I'll call you sis. I'm doing really well. We're just going through the Prisma Visions deck here. So then after the Four of Swords, we reach the Five of Swords. And the Five of Swords is, it's the moment where you finally realize what an asshole you've been being, right? The Five of Swords is typically depicted as like one guy picking up swords and like two guys kind of defeated walking away. So you can even see this kind of here, right? Like this one guy's more confrontational and these other guys are not so into it. It's typically the card that represents like the moment where you say something that you'll regret. You've pushed people away because of things you've said. You're saying things that you don't necessarily feel. Or they might be things that you do feel, but you probably shouldn't have verbalized in a way. Yeah. It's kind of a regret card in a lot of ways, but it's also the card that helps you realize that your stubbornness is a problem, right? Because you're hurting those around you. Here's the link to the music if anybody was wanting that. I need to fix that thing later, but things all messed up. So then after the 5, we get to the 6. And the 6, like all the 6s, is kind of about a movement, right? So you've accepted that you kind of screwed up and you need to atone for that, right? So the 6 is about crossing this bridge. Or in a lot of decks, it's like a boat, right? It's about making that journey across the river. You know, it's about accepting what you did and kind of moving to a place where you can really know why what you did was wrong. Typically, it's kind of like the sentiment of, you know, like when someone's, oh, I lost my train of thought there. Dang it, I had a good one. Ah! Dang it, I had a good one. Anyways. It's gone. I'm sorry, everybody. It's gone. It's a total squeaker moment. Dang it. I just completely dropped my train of thought there. So you've accepted that you messed up and you're moving to a place. Oh, okay. So it's kind of like, you know, like when someone says sorry, but they're like, I don't want you to say sorry. I want you to mean that you're sorry. It's that. That really wasn't so, like, groundbreaking as I made it seem, was it? When I see the Five of Swords, I think of the ladder climber who will cut their friends down to get ahead. Yeah, it's very much that kind of card. It is like taking the actions or saying the things that you know are wrong and you will regret, but you're too stubborn at that point in your life to accept that you're just being an asshole, right? And people are that card all the time. And, like, honestly, it's a really great card because, like, once you can accept that people are stuck in that stage or on that kind of energy in their journey, it makes it so much easier to forgive them. Like, sure, they could fuck you over, but, like, man, they're fucking themselves over too, right? That's the thing about the swords cards. Swords are a two-way street. And everybody goes through it. Everyone's a jerk at some point in their life. And people need to stop being so harsh on other people who are being jerks. Like, we can be more compassionate, right? Okay. It is almost like swords have two edges and they cut both ways. So, Seven of Swords, it's kind of taking back things for yourself in a way. It's kind of picking back up the things you've left behind. It's going through the actions and things you've done that caused the pain. Again, like kind of like how the Six of Cups was a nostalgia cards. In a lot of ways, the Seven of Swords is kind of a nostalgia cards, except it's accepting the mistakes you've made and the swords you've dropped along the way. Big brain. 200 IQ. Then after the 7, you get to the 8. And again, the 8 is more of a stability card, right? Look at how all these swords are just lined up in a row. Now, we've had a couple eights tonight, and I think it does apply here because we're kind of returning to the four in a lot of ways. So like the eight is like a card where you're starting to internalize a lot of the judgments of other people around you in a lot of situations. Like in a lot of readings, I feel like that applies. It's about like you taking what other people have said to you and beating yourself up about it. In this journey, I think it's more you just beating up yourself because it's kind of part of the process where to reach the step where you can really forgive yourself, you have to beat yourself up first, right? Like you're over here picking up all your swords, right? And going through all your memories and actions you did. And then here's just like where you feel like, God, what was I doing? Why did I do that? You know? And that's painful. Picking up swords is painful. Surprisingly, especially when this dude's over here picking them up by the blade for some reason. Okay, and then we get to the Nine of Swords, and we get this like really crazy like goose thing that comes in. But I think it's a great depiction of the nine because the nine is the card that's all about like anxiety and stuff, right? This is the anxiety and stress card. It's the card in the Rider-Waite with like the dude or the lady like sitting up in bed just holding their head with all the swords behind them, right? You're beating yourself up and then you're losing sleep over it because you just can't forgive yourself for what you've done. It's just caused all this anxiety and stress in your life and you're just like, God, how do I make things right? There's only one way to make things right, and that's with the Ten of Swords, which is the full acceptance card, right? This is the card with a dude. This is the card with a dude impaled by a bunch of swords, right? Well, he's impaled with a bunch of swords because he's letting his actions and things, like he's letting his karma hit him back, right? He's accepted what he's done. The only way to really be repentant with it is to accept that it's done and fix it if you can. But there's no way to fix it because there's no way you can just be entitled to someone's forgiveness, right? That's the Untitled Goose Game. Good lord, he has sword teeth now. Oh, that gardener better look out. But yeah, the Ten of Swords is usually like seen as a really negative card. I don't think it's negative. I think it's kind of like letting yourself be punctured to kind of let that stress and anxiety out. Like let yourself forgive yourself, right? Sure, you have to die a bit, but like the part of you that's dying is the part of you that was an asshole, right? So you've grown, you've gotten better through this journey of the swords. Like it's painful, but yeah, it is a less intense death. It's got a lot in common with like the Tower, I feel like, where you're not quite crumbling down completely, but a part of you does, and that part of you changes forever. In a good way, usually. It could also be in a bad way, I guess, but not usually. I feel like the badness of the swords usually just comes from earlier. So then we go to the Page of Swords, and again, this is kind of immature energy. This guy's not quite sure how to completely wield his new sword. It's usually a card about hesitation. You may have figured out the things and finally gotten rid of the stress and accepted the wrong you've done, but you're still hesitant to like move on and make new actions. Just because you've kind of returned to like a more you're more mature, but you're back in an immature place, right? Like you're more mature, but you have to grow again and keep growing, and the cycle kind of repeats itself. So you're back into like a more newbie stage. Then we got another crazy goose coming back for more in the Knight of Swords. Again, like all the other knights, he's kind of impulsive. This is a sword about, or this is a card about making a decision that might not be the most considered, right? It might be like charging into battle and you're just cutting left and right, you know? You're just expressing your opinions again. He's kind of looping back around. You may have found some confidence and comfort in your new self, but you're still going to charge ahead eventually because eventually you'll gain enough confidence to do that. Yeah, this is totally a story deck. And like I said earlier, I haven't done any readings with this deck, so I don't know how it reads. But like as a teaching tool and like as a conceptual tool, I think it's amazing. I think it would be a little hard to read off of, honestly. Oh, is it on Amazon? That's good. I thought it was limited print, but maybe that's just from if you're ordering directly from the artist. I bet you can buy it from some shops. I got mine from my shop, so she had a couple copies of this. And then you get to the Queen and the King. And it's a nice goose. Look at this. Look at Nice Goose. Because he's got a muzzle on now. There's actually two versions of this deck on the artist's page. I don't know what the difference is, though. I think one of them's in sepia or something, but it's in like the purple box. This one's in like the blue box. I don't know which one you'd prefer. But yeah, if it's called the Prisma Visions deck, I think... Let me see if it's on Amazon real quick. I'm sure it's the same deck. Oh yeah, this does look correct. Yeah, so this does look like the right deck. Whoops. I think this looks like the real deck to me. This looks like the exact copy I have. Now, like I said earlier, it's also a bit of a more expensive deck, though, so keep that in mind. But as I was also finish off the swords here, King and Queen, you know, same as all the other King and Queens. Like Queen's more controlled with her thought. The Queen can be really blunt in this case. Like she says what's on her mind because she knows that's the most effective way. Sometimes is to just speak the truth, and sometimes it's cold, but sometimes it's also necessary. And then the King of Swords is usually a pretty smart guy, sometimes a bit too smart for his own good. Sometimes he's a bit blunt too, but he's usually good at like enacting things, right? Like if you were a lawyer, being a King of Swords would be good. It's a common target for knockoffs. Yeah, I don't think this one is one. This one on Amazon looks legit. Knockoffs are kind of hard to tell on Amazon. It mainly depends on the seller. There's some... I mean, typically, you can tell if a deck's authentic or not. Or at least a reprint if you look at like the publisher and stuff. Which I think you should only buy reprints and stuff off of Amazon. I don't think there's a ton of like these kind of decks. Like this deck reached enough popularity from being like an independently published deck, right? Like it's kind of like the Wild Unknown. Like that was a publicly or an independently like published deck that got super popular, right? So it's easy to find that deck around, but it wasn't distributed through like US games or anything. But typically if something's distributed through US games, it'll say that on Amazon, and that's usually fine.